in this example here, we're looking at a dashboard that allows us to allocate things like overhead to product categories. In this particular example, the ultimate outcome of this is a full P&L by customer. So if I just go to this particular dashboard and scroll down a little bit, what you're seeing here is basically a high-level P&L, which is showing us things like revenue, cost of revenue, down to margin, and then ultimately down to EBITDA. Now, there's kind of differing schools of thought in terms of, making decisions for products and customers based on contribution margin or based on margin and based on full profitability. And again, there's pros and cons to each. If we look at just pure margin, well, that's really something that is directly traceable to each customer and to each product, right? So you have your direct costs, and those go directly. That can be identified or tagged to a customer product, go directly against those customer and products, and therefore you're looking at a pure margin measure, if you will, and then you can make decisions based on margin for that. And that in that case, it's the pro is it's a pure metric, but the con is that it's really not taking into account the other ancillary costs that go into supporting that product and customer. So you're really not getting a true picture of the profitability. And so you really have to bring in other costs to be able to get that picture. So so what you're going to see is an example of, additional line items here being populated as a result of the attribution process, if you will, from product category to product and ultimately to channel and customer. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at this first step of the allocation. Now, this is an example of a multi-step process where essentially what you've got is business units that are directly supporting that the whole that side of the business that ultimately results in revenue from products and customers. So we've got IT, procurement, and facilities. And they've got certain expenses that they've accumulated. And in this case, what you're able to do is decide ultimately like how those are going to be allocated. So yes, this is an allocation process. And one of the cons of going below margin is ultimately you're getting into an allocation process, which can be viewed or interpreted by some as being somewhat arbitrary. But ultimately there can be business drivers behind it that make it less more scientific, more mathematical, and less arbitrary, if you will. And we're going to talk about that more in a follow-up webinar where we get into cost to serve. I'm not going to focus a lot on the mechanics of this process. I more want to focus on how Anaplan drives the transparency that leads to accountability. But we'll get into the mechanics in a future webinar about how you can actually inject more science and math into that process to again take some of that arbitrary nature of that allocations tend to be. So in this case here, what we're going to do is we're going to base the first round of allocations on 50% headcount, 50% time study. And again, you also have the ability to affect these rules as well directly on the dashboard by deciding I want to allocate to these categories and not these ones. So you can actually do that. And you can also add new allocation rules on the fly. So the Anaplan platform, one of the things that makes it so strong is the fact that it's business user owned as well, which means that you can actually be having business users creating and maintaining allocation rules rather than having that fall into the IT realm, if you will. But so what we want to get to is a situation where we want to see these costs being allocated out first to category. So now we'll just go ahead and activate these rules. And you'll notice just by doing that, you're seeing the amounts being allocated out in real time as we're doing that, and you're immediately seeing that now being reflected at the category level. And again, another strength of this platform is the fact that these calculations are being done in memory and they're immediate. So you can immediately see the downstream implications of any assumptions or changes you make or decisions you make on the upstream side, and you see those things immediately. And you also can see that there's also some checks around whether things are being duplicated and whether things are fully allocated. And so that's another thing that this platform does, is that it is able to validate that data in real time and give you that feedback. So right now we've gone to product category. Let's take things to the next level and actually move to product. So product rolls up to category. So now what we're doing is we're taking amounts that were not by product category, pushing them out to product category, and then now down a hierarchy within that product category down to the individual product level. And you'll see here that we can, again, decide which categories are being allocated to which product lines, determining that allocation basis. And again, if I wanted to make this 50% and make the time study 30%, I can easily do that. And then just by activating these rules, you can see those amounts being allocated out, in real time, and immediately being able to see those amounts reflected, by product and by category. And if I wanted to change this back to 60% and make this, 20%, you can see that reaction, that immediate reaction in real time. And that's the power of this in-memory platform. So as we're doing that, we move to customer and channel. And then what we can, as we scroll down, we can immediately see that, we're starting to update our full P&L, by customer. And what's missing now is sort of that last step allocation to get to a full level profitability. Because you can see right now for this particular customer, this customer looks actually pretty good, right? We're making $350,000, but does that reflect reality? And so what you're also able to do is, pick whether there's a channel specific mapping. So is this going to a digital channel? Is it going to telephone or brand or other types of channels, whatever? You can have that channel approach. You can also pick your channel allocation drivers. So for sales, we want to make this based on, let's say, transaction volume. So as we do that, you can see that the allocations have started to occur. Right now, we're seeing that there's an error because we're not fully allocated, and that's because we haven't picked the rest of our drivers. So maybe sales administration is also going to be based on transaction volume. But then as we get to marketing, maybe that's going to be based on revenue, as well as customer service, as well as finance. Those are also going to be based on revenue. And now Anaplan has now fully allocated out everything 100%. And as we scroll down, we can see the makeup of those allocations to channel, and then ultimately those channels down to customers, and then ultimately down to a full P&L. And you can see that, while we were potentially, making a positive margin on this particular customer, we're actually not making money on this particular customer. So this is how incorporating all the possible cost of supporting this line of business can lead to potentially different outcomes if you base your decision on margin versus overall profitability. And what you're able to do also is slice through the different dimensions and take a look at our different customers. So you can see, okay, in this particular case here in customer one, we actually have a positive margin, so that's good. But as we get to customer two, you can see we have a negative income. And if we take a look at customer three, this is a bit of a unique case, because an interesting case, because you can see we have a positive margin, but ultimately once we consider all the costs and the drivers the resources that this particular customer is consuming within the organization, ultimately it's not a profitable customer. So this is one candidate that we would look to say, well, margin doesn't necessarily encompass the whole picture. And now we've got something to go back to this customer with when, potentially contracts come up for renewal or what have you, where we could actually renegotiate and share with them the whole picture, or give them some reasons as to why things need to be renegotiated, because ultimately they're not profitable for us. And now that we know sort of the allocation results, what we also can do is actually start drilling into this a little bit and seeing, well, this direct SG&A, why is this number this number? Well, you can actually right click and utilize another capability within the platform that allows you to actually start drilling down and start understanding like where these allocation results are coming from. And you can actually just do a free form drill down. Why is sales 41,000? Let's drill down a little bit further. Here's a good example, right? That amount is based on 33% of revenue. Right. So you're able to drill back from a summarized number down into the business drivers and assumptions that are driving that calculated result. And now what you are able to have is a discussion as to why is it 33%? Well, it's because that's the transaction volume that you're driving. That's the driver. And so now you're able to have a conversation about whether that makes sense, whether it's logical. What Anaplan allows you to do is actually start that conversation. And instead of having that sort of classic disagreement of, well, I don't agree with these numbers, the person affected or the group affected by this able to drill down on a self-service basis and understand what's driving the allocation and then have that discussion. So that's really what I wanted to share with you today. And again, more on the mechanics of the actual process itself in a future webinar.